Welcome back. Today I'll be talking about Ida B Wells, who was later known as Ida B Wells-Barnett because she was married to Ferdinand Barnett. And she was born enslaved in Holly Springs, Mississippi in 1862. Her parents were James and Elizabeth Wells. Ida was the first of 8 children. Wells was 3 years old when slavery was abolished in the U.S. Like most of the survivors of slavery, Wells's parents were emotionally and physically scarred by the experience. For example, Wells's mom, Elizabeth, who was a famous cook, spent many years unsuccessfully trying to locate relatives who were sold away into slavery. She also had the scars of slavery on her body. Ida's father, James Wells, coped by avoiding the slavery-like conditions of sharecropping by using his carpentry training to assert his dignity and feed his family. Further, in 1867, when black men were permitted to vote, James Wells defied the opinions of his white employers and voted according to his conscience. Ida's parents valued literacy, education, and their Christian faith. Writing about her parents' views of education, Wells wrote that her parents stated, "The children's job was to go to school and learn all we could." Personally, I really love this, knowing that a few years earlier it was illegal to educate black people, and black children had every other job except learning. Wells attended Rust College as a young teen. The school was run by Methodist Episcopalian teachers who were harassed and threatened by members of the local community for teaching black students. At the age of 16, she lost both her parents and her youngest sibling to yellow fever. She chose to take care of her 6 living siblings while working as a school teacher and continuing her education. In 1881, at the age of 18, she and her 2 youngest sisters went to live in Memphis, Tennessee. There she continued to work as a teacher. Wells grew up during the Reconstruction era, when many rights were extended to African Americans, only to watch those freedoms severely restricted under Jim Crow. Wells was outraged by segregation. For example, when she was 22 years old, she bought a first-class ticket on the railroad train and refused to give up her seat and sit in the section reserved for black people. She was pre-Rosa Parks. She was forcibly removed by 3 men. She sued the railroad and won at the trial level, but lost on the appellate level at the Tennessee Supreme Court. In 1886, she was removed from her teaching position because she protested segregation in Memphis schools. Things would get worse for Wells in Memphis, but first in 1889, she was the first African American woman living in the U.S. to be a co-owner and editor of a newspaper called Memphis Free Speech. Under the pen name Iola Wells, she wrote about the ways Southern whites prevented black people from gaining equality. One of those ways was via the white terrorism of lynching. In 1892, after the lynching of one of her closest friends, Thomas Moss, she became even more invested in documenting lynchings and became the first person to launch an anti-lynching campaign using her investigative journalism skills. Between 1884 through 1892 alone, she documented 782 lynchings and would go on to document many more. People like Frederick Douglass applauded her for her anti-lynching work. Frederick Douglass wrote the following to her, quote, "Brave woman, you have done your people and mine a service which can neither be weighed nor measured. If American conscience were only half alive, if the American church and clergy were only half Christianized, if American moral sensibility were not hardened by the persistent infliction of outrage and crime against colored people, a scream of horror, shame, and indignation would rise to heaven wherever your pamphlets shall be read. But alas, even crime has power to reproduce itself and create conditions favorable to its own existence. If sometimes seems we're deserted by heaven and earth, yet we must still think, speak, and work, and trust in the power of a merciful God for our final deliverance." End quote. Not everyone was pleased with her anti-lynching campaign. Once, while attending a conference away from Memphis, an angry mob burnt down and destroyed her newspaper. This was because she revealed white men lynched some black men for false allegations of raping white women with whom they were having consensual sexual relationships. The mob threatened to lynch Wells if she returned. She continued to tour the country and Britain, and then she made a home in Chicago. Wells did not always feel brave and needed encouragement from her family. Wells reportedly had many suitors until she met a man who was about the liberation and elevation of black people, and he believed in the equality of women and men. His name was Ferdinand Barnett. He was born in Nashville, Tennessee on February 18, 1892. He was 10 years older than Wells. He was an attorney, writer, and lecturer, editor, and founder of the first black newspaper in Chicago, the Chicago Conservator, which he sold to Wells the year they married. He was a well-known promoter of racial equality and justice. Also, he was a widower. On June 27, 1895, at the age of 33, Wells married Ferdinand Barnett in Chicago. Their wedding made the prominent position of the first page of the New York Times. Wells, writing about her wedding, stated, quote, "The interest of the public in the affairs seemed to be so great that not only was the church filled to overflowing, but the streets surrounding the church were so packed with humanity that it was almost impossible for the carriage bearing the wedding bridal party to reach the church door," end quote. The Barnetts raised a family that included their 4 biological children: Charles Aked, Herman Colesat, Ida B Wells Jr., and Alfreda M., in addition to Ferdinand's 2 sons from his first marriage, Ferdinand Lee Barnett Jr. and Albert Graham. It was her son Charles who would encourage her in 1909 after the Cairo lynching, when she thought, quote, "I didn't see why I should have to go and do the work that others refuse." And her son Charles reportedly said, quote, "Mother, if you don't go, nobody else will." On May 4th, 2020, Ida B Wells-Barnett was honored with a posthumous Pulitzer Prize for her outstanding and courageous reporting on lynchings. Wells lived a life that revealed her commitment to the empowerment of women. For example, she postponed her wedding 3 times to keep her anti-lynching tour schedule, not to be derailed by domestic bliss. In 1894, while working on the campaign for woman Lucy Flowers to hold a statewide position, the first woman who would do so, Wells had a 6-month-old and only agreed to the assignment if a nurse was provided at every stop on the tour. Wells stated, quote, "I honestly believe that I am the only woman in the United States who ever traveled throughout the country with a nursing baby to make political speeches." She was ahead of her time. Wells worked on political campaigns for both black and white candidates. She practiced defiance when she participated in the biracial women's suffragettes movement. Wells was aware of and in 1894 participated in debates at Suzanne B. Anthony's home about excluding black female suffragettes from the movement to appease white supremacists in the South. Wells argued that this approach would, quote, "confirm white women's segregationist views." On March 3rd, 1913, suffragettes march in Washington. White organizers decided that black women should be placed in the back of the march instead of intermingled with white delegates. A tearful Wells-Barnett told the delegation that, quote, "if they did not take a stand now in this great democratic parade, then the colored women are lost." Further, she stated she would march with her delegation or not at all. Then she disappeared for a while. The black newspaper, the Chicago Broad-Axe, reported Wells proudly marched with the head ladies of the Illinois delegation, showing that no colored line existed in the first national parade of the noble women who are in favor of equal suffrage. She stood her ground. Similarly, all the other black women involved ignored the segregation order and marched with their delegation. But Wells also fought sexism within the black community. In 1909, Wells was one of the co-founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. However, despite her qualifications, she was excluded from leadership and pushed to the margins of the organization. In the article NAACP and the Erasure of Ida B Wells, Substack, March 2025, Shanna posits 3 reasons for Wells' erasure from the NAACP. 1. Wells took a militant, direct approach and believed in self-defense. Du Bois and others were more in line with respectability politics of their white supporters. 2. Wells refused to take the behind-the-scene roles that men relegated women to. 3. They deliberately shut her out of meetings and left her out of the history. Sad, but she's remembered by us right now. So what we see here is from the cradle of slavery. Wells, Ida Bell Wells-Barnett went on to be a boss woman. Boss woman Ida Bell Wells-Barnett. What do you think about her? Thanks for listening.